She laughed at her mother in front of the judge. Seconds later, she regretted it. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. I've been a judge for 32 years. I've sentenced murderers, freed the innocent, and watched families tear themselves apart over money, pride, and silence. You'd think after all that time nothing would surprise me anymore. You'd be wrong. Her name was Caroline Halden, 23 years old. Blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Designer clothes that probably cost more than my first car. She walked into my courtroom on a Tuesday morning in late September, flanked by two lawyers in suits so expensive they practically hummed. The charge? Speeding through a school zone, 60 in a 25. Reckless, sure, but not the kind of case that keeps you up at night. I run a small county courthouse in a city you've probably never heard of, somewhere between too big to be quiet and too small to matter. We handle traffic violations, small claims, the occasional DUI. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, or at least, it used to be. Caroline stood before me with her hands clasped in front of her, calm as Sunday morning. Her lead attorney, a man named Philip Rourke, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, stepped forward and laid out the basics. His client had made a mistake. She was remorseful. She was willing to pay the fine and attend a defensive driving course. Open and shut. I'd signed. Off on 100 cases just like it. But then I looked at her. Really looked at her. And that's when I saw it. The smile. Not a nervous smile. Not an apologetic one. Just a smile. Faint. Constant. Like she was in on a joke no one else had heard yet. I asked her if she understood the severity of speeding in a school zone. She nodded. I asked if she had anything to say. She shook her head. But her hands, those perfectly manicured hands, were trembling. Not from fear. From something else. Something I couldn't name. I signed the paperwork. Standard fine, court adjourned. She turned to leave and, just before she reached the door, she glanced back at me. Her lips moved, barely, but I couldn't hear what she said. Maybe it was thank you. Maybe it was something else. 2 days later, Officer Miguel Diaz, the man who'd pulled her over, didn't come home. His wife called the precinct that night. By morning, every cop in the county was looking for him. 15-year veteran, decorated, reliable. The kind of man who didn't just vanish, but he did. And all I could think about was that smile. Officer Miguel Diaz had a routine. Everyone who knew him said the same thing. He woke up at 5:30. Every morning, ran 3 miles, kissed his wife goodbye, and was at the precinct by 7. He filed every report in triplicate. He never missed a shift. He coached Little League on Saturdays. The kind of man you'd want as a neighbor. The kind of cop you'd want on your side. When he didn't come home, that Tuesday night, his wife, Elena, thought maybe he'd been called in for overtime. It happened sometimes. But when he didn't answer his phone, and Miguel always answered his phone, she knew something was wrong. By Wednesday morning, the precinct was in full scramble mode. His patrol car was found, parked near the courthouse, keys still in the ignition, radio silent. No sign of struggle, no blood, no note, just gone. Like he'd stepped out of his life and never stepped back in. I got the call from the district attorney's office on Thursday. They wanted to reopen Caroline Halden's case. Not for the speeding ticket, but for questioning. They didn't say why, they didn't have to. A cop pulls over a rich girl. 2 days later, he disappears. You don't need a law degree to see the connection. I agreed to a preliminary hearing, Friday afternoon. My courtroom was quieter than usual. Just me. The new prosecutor, Caroline, and her lawyers. She walked in wearing white, a crisp blouse, tailored pants, heels that clicked softly on the marble floor. She looked like she was going to brunch, not a legal interrogation. I asked her to state her name for the record. She did. Calm. Clear. No. Hesitation. Then I asked her if she'd had any contact with Officer Diaz after he issued the citation. She tilted her head slightly, like she was considering the question for the first time. No, Your Honor, she said softly. I never even saw his face. That line stuck with me. I never even saw his face. It wasn't a lie, technically. Diaz had pulled her over at dusk, walked up to her window, handed her the ticket, and left. She probably hadn't looked at him, but the way she said it, it felt rehearsed, like she'd been waiting for someone to ask. I dismissed her. There was no evidence linking her to anything. Not yet. But as she walked out, I caught her glancing at me again, just for a second, and this time I saw it clearly. That same faint smile. I sat alone in the courtroom for a long time after everyone left. The sun was setting through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the empty benches. I kept thinking about Miguel Diaz, about his wife, about his kids, and I kept thinking about Caroline Halden. Something was wrong. I didn't know what, but I could feel it, the way you feel a storm coming before the sky even turns dark. I did what any judge would do. I started digging, quietly. Not officially, not yet, just looking. Because when a case doesn't sit right, you don't ignore it. You pull the thread and see what unravels. The Halden name carried weight in our city. Real weight. The kind that opens doors before you even knock. Richard Halden, Caroline's father, owned half the commercial real estate downtown. Office buildings, shopping centers, that new luxury apartment complex by the river. His. He'd built an empire from the ground up, or so the story went. Self-made, charitable, untouchable. He donated to every mayoral campaign for the past 20 years. Sat on the boards of hospitals, schools, the community arts center. His face was on plaques all over town. In generous support of, with gratitude to, you know the type. The kind of man who gets a wing of a building named after him while he's still alive. But the more I looked, the more I noticed what wasn't there. His wife, Evelyn, had been a fixture in local society. Charity galas, fundraisers, all of it. Then, 10 years ago, she just stopped appearing. The official story was that she'd left for Europe. Extended travel, personal reasons. No one questioned it. Or if they did it quietly. I asked around, carefully. A few older lawyers remembered her. Lovely woman, one of them said. Always smiling, but you could tell something was off. She looked tired, worn down. Another told me she'd heard Evelyn had filed for divorce once, but the petition was withdrawn 2 days later. No explanation. I pulled the public records. Nothing. No divorce filing. No travel records I could access without a warrant. Just silence. And then there was Caroline, their only child, born into privilege, private schools, tennis lessons, the kind of childhood that should have produced someone confident, polished, secure. But when I looked at her record, not criminal, just documented, I saw cracks. 3 different universities, no degree, 2 arrests, vandalism and trespassing. Both charges dropped, and 6 months ago a 72-hour hold at a private psychiatric facility, voluntary admission. The discharge notes were sealed. I sat in my study that night looking at printouts and notes spread across my desk. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. My wife had gone to bed hours ago. I should have too. But I couldn't stop thinking about that. Family. About the mother who vanished. The father who smiled for cameras, the daughter who smiled in my courtroom. There was something wrong with that smile. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't nerves. It was disconnect. Like she was watching herself from a distance. Like none of it touched her. I closed the folder and turned off the light. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, one thought kept circling back. What kind of family teaches a girl to smile like that? Rebecca Torres came to see me in chambers 3 days later. She didn't call ahead, didn't schedule an appointment. She just showed up, knocked twice, and walked in before I could say come in. Rebecca was young, maybe 30, but sharp as they come. She'd been with the DA's office for 5 years, built a reputation for being thorough, relentless, and fair. The kind of prosecutor defense attorneys respected, even when she beat them. I'd watched her handle dozens of cases in my courtroom. She never rattled, never rushed. She was good at her job. But that day she looked rattled. She closed the door behind her, didn't sit down, just stood there, hands clasped in front of her like she was holding something fragile. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "I think we're being watched." I leaned back in my chair. Watched by who? She glanced at the door, then back at me. "I don't know, but since we reopened the Halden case, everything's been off. Requests for evidence get delayed. Witnesses suddenly become unavailable. I filed a subpoena for Richard Halden's financial records last week. It's been sitting on someone's desk ever since. No reason given." I nodded slowly. "Bureaucracy. It happens. Not like this." She finally sat down, perched on the edge of the chair. "There's a black sedan that's been parked outside my apartment for the past 2 nights. Same car, same spot. No plates I can see. And yesterday I got a call from the deputy chief's office. They wanted to know why I was pursuing a low-priority case with such intensity." Those were his exact words. I studied her face. She wasn't panicking. She was calculating, measuring risk. "Did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him I was doing my job." She paused. "He told me to be careful, that powerful families can make life difficult for people who push too hard." The room went quiet. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Outside, someone laughed in the hallway. Normal sounds. Normal day. But nothing about this felt normal. "What do you want me to do, Rebecca?" She looked at me for a long moment. "I want the truth, Your Honor. That's all. But I don't think I'm going to get it." "Why not?" "Because 3 hours ago I got reassigned." Her voice was flat, matter of fact, but I could see the tension in her jaw. "Effective immediately. They're moving me to a case in another county. Domestic dispute. Low level. They said it's a better fit for my skill set." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Who authorized?" "The DA himself." She stood up. I tried to argue, he wouldn't hear it. He said the Halden case would be handed over to someone with more experience. "Who?" "Daniel Grant." I knew Grant. Older prosecutor. Competent, but safe. The kind of lawyer who didn't make waves, who closed cases quietly and went home on time. Rebecca moved toward the door, then stopped. She turned back, and for the first time since she walked in, I saw something close to fear in her eyes. "Your Honor, be careful. Whatever this is, it's bigger than a speeding ticket." She left without waiting for a response. I sat there alone, staring at the closed door, thinking about black sedans and reassignments and a girl who smiled when she should have been scared. And I realized this wasn't about Caroline anymore. It was about what she knew. And who didn't want anyone else to find out? Daniel Grant took over the case without protest. He was methodical, calm, the kind of lawyer who never raised his voice or asked a question he didn't already know the answer to. He scheduled a deposition with Caroline for the following week. I decided to sit in, observe. The deposition was held in a small conference room adjoining the courthouse. Caroline arrived on time, dressed simply, jeans, a sweater, minimal makeup. Her lawyer, Philip Rourke, sat beside her, silent and watchful. Grant started with the basics. "Where were you on the night Officer Diaz disappeared?" She said she'd been home, alone. Her father, was traveling for business. No alibi, but she wasn't nervous. She answered every question with the same measured tone, the same faint smile. Then Grant asked about her mother. Caroline didn't blink. She laughed, short, sharp, almost amused. "My mother?" she said, cocking her head. "She left before I learned how to spell her name." The room fell silent. Even the court reporter paused. I felt something in my chest twist, not as a judge, as a man who still missed his own mother. Grant pressed. "Do you know where she is now?" Caroline's face returned to calm. She looked directly at me. "No one does." "Your Honor." The room felt colder after that. She had laughed at her mother in front of me, in front of everyone, and a second later, Everything in her shifted, not regret, but calculation. It was like watching a shadow fall over a mask. Grant asked a few more questions. She answered them all. Then, the deposition ended. She stood, smoothed her sweater, and walked out. But that laugh stayed with me. Not cruel, not careless, just detached. Like her mother was a stranger, or worse, like she was already gone. A week later, my clerk handed me an envelope. No return address, no postage. Someone had left it on the courthouse steps. Inside was a single piece of paper with a phone number written in black ink. Below it, a time, 11 p.m. I almost threw it away. Anonymous tips rarely lead anywhere useful. But something made me keep it. Maybe curiosity, maybe stupidity. At 11 that night, I sat alone in my study and dialed the number. It rang twice. Then a man's voice answered. Low, gravelly, cautious. "Your Honor," he said. Not a question, a statement. He knew who I was. "Who is this?" I asked. "Someone who used to work for Richard Halden." A pause. "Someone who knows things." "What kind of things?" "Things about Officer Diaz, things about Evelyn Halden, things about Caroline." My pulse quickened. "If you have information, you need to go to the police." He laughed, bitter, dry. "Your Honor, half the department is on his payroll, and this isn't the first time someone disappeared. Around that family." I gripped the phone tighter. "Then why call me?" "Because you're asking questions, and because you're one of the few people in this town he doesn't own yet." Another pause. "Be careful, Your Honor. You're not dealing with a speeding ticket. You're dealing with a man who buries problems, literally." "Wait," I started to say, but the line went dead. I sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. My wife was asleep upstairs. The house was silent, but my mind was screaming. This isn't the first time someone disappeared around that family. I thought about Evelyn Halden, about Officer Diaz, about Caroline's laugh, and I wondered, how many bodies does it take before silence becomes complicity? I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I did something I should have done from the beginning. I requested the original traffic citation from the clerk's office, the physical document. It should have been routine, a 5-minute retrieval. It took 3 days. When the file finally came back, the citation wasn't there. In its place was a handwritten note on yellow paper. Misfiled. Being located. I called the clerk personally. She apologized, said it happened sometimes, promised to keep looking. I asked for the digital backup. She said she'd check. 2 hours later, she called back. The digital file had been corrupted. Server error. They were working on recovering it. I asked for the dashcam footage. From Officer Diaz's patrol car. Standard procedure. Every traffic stop is recorded. She said she'd forward the request to the precinct. The precinct called me that afternoon. The footage was gone. Erased, they said, during a routine server update 3 weeks ago. Just bad luck. These things happen. I've been a judge for 32 years. I know what a cover-up smells like, and this one reeked. I requested a meeting with the police chief. He came to my chambers the following day, polite, professional, apologetic. He assured me it was all coincidence. Bureaucratic incompetence, nothing sinister. "Your Honor," he said, leaning back in his chair, "we're a small department. Our systems are outdated. Files get lost. It's unfortunate, but it's not unusual." I looked him in the eye. 3 separate documents, all related to the same case, all gone. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he looked away. That told me everything. "We'll keep looking," he said quietly, but we both knew he wouldn't find anything. After he left, I sat alone in my chambers, staring at the empty file folder on my desk. Someone was erasing Caroline Halden's trail. Methodically, carefully. And they had help. I couldn't let it go. Maybe I should have. Maybe a smarter man would have, but I've never been good at walking away from questions that don't have answers. I had my clerk pull every public record tied to Caroline Halden's name. Court filings, property records, anything accessible without a warrant. What came back disturbed me more than I expected. She'd been enrolled in 3 different universities over 5 years. Started at an Ivy League school back east. Full scholarship, despite her father's wealth. Dropped out after 1 semester, no explanation. Transferred to a state school closer to home. Lasted a year. Then a small liberal arts college 2 hours away. She never graduated from any of them. But that wasn't the worst of it. 6 years ago, she'd been arrested for vandalism. Spray-painted obscenities on the side of a downtown building her father owned. Charges dropped within 48 hours. 3 years later, trespassing. She'd broken into an abandoned house on the north side of town. Charges dropped again. And 6 months ago, the psychiatric hold. 72 hours at a private facility in the next county. The intake form listed the admission as voluntary, but the discharge notes were sealed. I couldn't access them without a court order, and I had no legal grounds to request one. I sat back in my chair, staring at the papers spread across my desk. What kind of person walks into my courtroom laughing while a cop is missing? What kind of person smiles when asked about their vanished mother? What kind of person laughs? The answer, I was beginning to realize, was someone who'd been taught that consequences didn't apply to them. Someone who'd watched the people around them bend and break and disappear, and learned that power could erase anything but that. Laugh stayed with me. Not cruel, not careless, just detached. Like she was watching her own life from a distance. Like none of it was real. Or maybe like she'd stopped caring a long time ago. Richard Halden requested a private meeting. The request came through his attorney, formal, polite, and impossible to ignore. He wanted to speak with me, off the record, just the 2 of us. I should have refused. Judges don't meet privately with parties involved in ongoing cases. It's improper, it's dangerous. But I was curious. And maybe, if I'm being honest, I wanted to look him in the eye. He came to my chambers on a Thursday afternoon. No lawyers, no assistants, just him. He wore a navy suit, perfectly tailored, and moved with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from never hearing the word no. He sat across from me, folded his hands, and looked at me with the calm expression of a man who'd been in 1,000 negotiations and won most of them. "Your Honor," he said, his voice smooth and measured, "I appreciate you taking the time to see me." "Mr. Halden," I replied, "I'm not sure this is appropriate." "I understand." He nodded. "But I'm not here as a defendant or a witness. I'm here as a father." That word, father, hung in the air between us. "I know you're a fair man," he continued. "I know you care about justice, and I know my daughter has issues." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Caroline has been struggling for years. She was diagnosed with a personality disorder when she was 17. Borderline, they called it. Maybe something more. We've tried everything, therapy, medication, residential treatment. Nothing seemed to help. She'd improve for a while, then spiral again. It's been exhausting for all of us." I listened, didn't interrupt, didn't react. "She's not a bad person, Your Honor. She's sick. And when she's sick, she says things, does things she doesn't mean, things that look worse than they are." "Like laughing about her mother?" I said quietly. His jaw tightened. Just for a second. Then the calm mask returned. "Her mother left us 10 years ago. It destroyed Caroline. She's never recovered. She blames herself, she blames me, she blames Evelyn. The laugh, it's a defense mechanism. Her therapist explained it. When she's confronted with painful emotions, she detaches, dissociates. It's not cruelty. It's survival." He leaned forward slightly. "Officer Diaz's disappearance is a tragedy, but it has nothing to do with my daughter. She was home that night, alone. Yes, she has no alibi, but that doesn't make her guilty. You know that better than anyone." I studied his face. He was good, very good. Every word sounded reasonable, sympathetic, human. But something was missing, something in his eyes. They were too steady, too controlled. "Mr. Halden," I said slowly, "if your daughter is innocent, then you have nothing to worry about." He smiled, faint, polite. "I'm not worried about the law, Your Honor. I'm worried about perception, about what this is doing to her. She's fragile. And this investigation, it's pushing her to a breaking point. Then maybe the truth will set her free," I said. His smile faded. "Your Honor," he said, his voice dropping, "I'm asking you, as a father, to let this go for her sake, or for everyone's sake." I looked at him for a long time. Then I stood. "Mr. Halden, I'm not a father in this room. I'm a judge, and I can't let anything go until I know what happened to Officer Diaz, and to your wife." His face went cold, not angry, just empty. He stood slowly, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the door. Then he stopped and turned back. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "I hope you know what you're doing." It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but it felt like one. After he left, I sat alone for a long time, staring at the door. Let this go. That's what he'd said. That's what he wanted. And that's when I knew I was supposed to. Someone wanted this case buried. And Richard Halden had just told me, in the politest way possible, that I was standing in the way. I couldn't sleep that night. Richard Halden's words kept circling in my head. Let this go, not a request, a warning. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not at him, but at myself. Because part of me wanted to listen. Part of me wanted to sign off on the case, let it fade into the background, and go back to traffic violations and small claims. But I couldn't, not anymore. At 2 in the morning, my phone rang. I grabbed it off the nightstand, fumbled in the dark. The caller ID was blocked. "Hello?" My voice was rough with sleep. "Your Honor." The same gravelly voice from before, the anonymous caller. "I told you to be careful." I sat up. "Who are you?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you're still asking questions. And that means you're not backing down." "No," I said, "I'm not." A pause. I could hear him breathing, slow, deliberate. "There's a storage unit on the east side of town. Mayfield Self-Storage, Unit 237. You need to see what's inside." My heart was pounding now. "What's in there?" "Proof," he said. "Financial records, emails, communications between Richard Halden and half the city officials you think you can trust. He's been buying people for years, judges, cops, inspectors, politicians, and buried in those files is the truth about Evelyn Halden. How do you know this?" "Because I helped him hide it." His voice cracked slightly. "I was his accountant for 12 years. I filed the paperwork. I moved the money. I watched him destroy anyone who got in his way. And I kept my mouth shut because I was scared. But Officer Diaz, that was different. He was a good man. And he didn't deserve what happened to him. What did happen to him? He was getting close, too close. He'd been investigating the Halden family for months. Quietly, off the books. He found something. I don't know what. But 2 days after he pulled Caroline over, he was gone. I gripped. The phone tighter. Is he alive? Silence. "I don't know," the man said finally. "But if he is, he's not coming back." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because someone has to stop him, and you're the only one left who's still trying." He gave me the address again, told me to bring a warrant, told me to move fast. Then he hung up. I didn't hesitate. I got dressed, drove to the courthouse, woke up a magistrate judge I trusted, and got the warrant by dawn. By 8 a.m., I was standing outside Mayfield Self-Storage with 2 sheriff's deputies and a locksmith. Unit 237 was in the back. Corner, small, rusted, unremarkable. The locksmith cut through the padlock in under a minute. The deputies pulled open the metal door. Inside was nothing. The unit was completely empty. Bare concrete floor, bare walls, not a scrap of paper, not a file, not a box, Nothing. I stepped inside, my boots echoing in the hollow space. I looked around, disbelief turning to frustration, frustration turning to rage. Someone had cleaned it out. Recently. The floor was swept. There wasn't even dust. One of the deputies checked the corners, the ceiling. Your Honor, there's nothing here. I stood in. The middle of that empty room, fists clenched, feeling like a fool. I'd been played. Set up. Someone had lured me here just to prove a point. You can't touch us. I was about to leave when I saw it. A single photograph, face down on the floor near the back corner. I walked over and picked it up. My blood ran cold. It was a picture of Caroline Halden, standing next to Officer Miguel Diaz. They were outside a diner, somewhere local, judging by the sign in the background. She was smiling. He wasn't. His expression was serious, guarded, like he was listening to something he didn't want to hear, and written on the back in blue ink. She knew. I turned the photo over again, looked at Caroline's face, that same smile, the same detached, empty smile I'd seen in my courtroom. The same laugh, frozen in time. She'd met with him, after the traffic stop, maybe before, and whatever they'd talked about, whatever she'd told him, it was enough to make him disappear. I slipped the photo into my jacket and walked out of that storage unit. Someone had tried to erase the evidence, but they'd left one piece behind, maybe on purpose, maybe by accident. Either way, it was enough, because now I knew Caroline wasn't just connected to Officer Diaz's disappearance. She was involved. The photograph changed everything. It was evidence, real, tangible evidence, that Caroline had been in contact with Officer Diaz after the traffic stop. But it also raised more questions than it answered. What were they talking about? Why had they met? And who had taken the picture? I needed to know more about Evelyn Halden. The anonymous caller had said the storage unit contained the truth about her. Even though the files were gone, that photograph felt like a breadcrumb, a clue left behind deliberately. I started digging into Evelyn's disappearance, officially this time. I requested the case file from 10 years ago. It took a week to arrive, and when it did, it was thinner than I expected. 4 pages, a missing person report filed by Richard Halden himself, claiming his wife had left voluntarily. A brief statement from Caroline, who'd been 13 at the time, and a closure memo from the detective assigned to the case. No evidence of foul play, classified as voluntary departure. That was it. No follow-up investigation, no interviews with friends or family, no forensic review. Nothing. I called the detective who'd handled it, a man named Walter Briggs, retired now, living in a quiet suburb 2 towns over. He agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near his home. Briggs was in his 70s, gray-haired and heavy-set, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much and stopped caring a long time ago. He ordered black coffee and sat across from me in a corner booth. I remember the Halden case, he said before I even asked. Hard to forget. Why's that? Because it stank from the beginning. He took a sip of his coffee. Evelyn Halden didn't just leave. I knew it the moment I walked into that house. Her clothes were still in the closet. Her car was in the garage, her purse, wallet, ID, credit cards, still on the kitchen counter. Who leaves the country without taking their purse? What did Richard say? He said she'd been depressed, said she'd been talking about leaving. For months. Said she took some cash and a few personal items and just went. Europe, he thought, maybe South America. He wasn't sure. And you believed him? Briggs looked at me with those tired eyes. No, Your Honor, I didn't, but it didn't matter what I believed. 3 days into the investigation, I got a call from the chief. He told me to close it. Said Richard Halden was a respected member of the community, and we had no reason to treat him like a suspect. He said if Evelyn wanted to leave her family, that was her right. So you closed it? I closed it. He stared into his coffee. I had a mortgage, 2 kids in college. I wasn't about to lose my pension over a case I couldn't win. I nodded slowly. I understood. I didn't like it, but I understood. Did you ever talk to Caroline? I asked. Once. Briefly. She was just a kid. 13, maybe 14. Quiet. Wouldn't look me in the eye. I asked her if her mother had seemed upset before she left. She said no. I asked if her mother had said goodbye. She said no. Then she asked if she could go back to her room. That was it. Did she seem scared? Briggs thought about it. No, she seemed empty, like someone had, scooped everything out of her and left a shell behind. I felt a chill run through me. Is there anything else you remember? I asked. Anything that didn't make it into the report? He hesitated. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slid it across the table. 3 weeks before Evelyn disappeared, she filed for divorce. I found the petition in the county clerk's office when I was doing background. It was withdrawn 48 hours later. No explanation. I unfolded the paper. It was a photocopy of the divorce petition. Standard language. Irreconcilable. Differences. But at the bottom there was a handwritten note in the margin. Faint, barely legible. I'm afraid of what he'll do. Who wrote that? I asked. I don't know. But it was in her handwriting. I compared it to other documents. It was hers. Why didn't you include this in the report? Because I was told not to. Briggs finished his coffee and stood up. Your Honor, I'm 73 years old. I don't have much time left and I don't sleep well most nights. What happened to Evelyn Halden has haunted me for 10 years. If you're reopening this case, do it right. Don't make the same mistakes I did. He left without another word. I sat alone in that coffee shop, staring at the petition, reading that line over and over again. I'm afraid of what he'll do. Evelyn Halden had been terrified of her husband. She'd tried to leave, and then she'd vanished, and her daughter, 13, years old at the time, had said nothing, felt nothing. Or maybe she'd learned even then that speaking up was dangerous. I thought about Caroline's laugh in the deposition, her detachment, her smile, and I realized she hadn't been born that way. She'd been made that way, by a man who silenced anyone, who threatened him, by a family that buried its secrets so deep no one dared to dig them up. But I was digging now, and I wasn't going to stop, because somewhere, maybe buried, maybe hidden, maybe still breathing, was the truth about what happened to Evelyn Halden, and her daughter knew where it was. I couldn't leave it alone. Evelyn Halden's face, what little I'd seen of it in old newspaper clippings, haunted me. A woman who'd smiled for charity galas, posed for family photos, and then vanished without a trace. A woman who'd written, I'm afraid of what he'll do in the margins of a divorce. Petition, and 48 hours later took it all back. What had he done to make her withdraw it? What had he said? What had he threatened? I needed more. I went back through the records, looking for anyone who might have known her. Friends, relatives, associates. Most of the names led nowhere. People who'd moved away, people who didn't want to talk, people who claimed they barely knew her. But then I found a name that stuck out. Thomas Vega, attorney. He'd drafted Evelyn's divorce petition, and according to the Bar Association records, he was still practicing, barely. Semi-retired. Now handling estate planning and wills out of a small office on the outskirts of town. I called him, left a message. 2 days later, he called back. Your Honor, he said, his voice cautious. I wasn't sure I'd hear from you. I'm looking into the disappearance of Evelyn Halden, I said. I understand you drafted her divorce petition 10 years ago. A long pause. I did. Can we meet? Another pause. Yes, but not at my office. We met at a park the next afternoon. Neutral ground, he'd said. He was in his late 60s, thin, with silver hair and glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He looked like a man who'd spent his life carefully avoiding trouble. But as he sat down on the bench beside me, I saw something else in his eyes. Guilt. I should have done more, he said before I could even ask a question. I should have fought harder. But I didn't, and I've regretted it every day since. Tell me what happened. He took a deep breath. Evelyn came to my office in September, 10 years ago. She was terrified. I mean, truly, deeply afraid. Her hands were shaking when she signed the intake forms. She told me she wanted a divorce. She said her husband was controlling, manipulative, dangerous. She said she'd tried to leave before, but he'd always found a way to stop her. Did she say how? Not directly, but she implied he had connections. People who owed him favors. People who could make problems disappear. He looked at me. She said she'd seen things. Things she couldn't unsee. What kind of things? She wouldn't say. She was too scared. But she said she had proof, documents, recordings, something that could destroy him if it ever got out. She said it was her insurance policy, her only way to protect herself if things went wrong. My pulse quickened. Where is it now? I don't know. She never told me. She said it was safer that way for both of us. What happened after you filed the petition? Vega's face darkened. 2 days later, she came back. She was different, calm, too calm. She said she'd made a mistake, that she'd overreacted, that she and Richard had talked things through and everything was fine. She asked me to withdraw the petition. I tried to talk her out of it. I told her she didn't have to go back, that there were resources, shelters, protection orders. She just smiled and said, "It's too late for that." Did she seem coerced? Absolutely, but what could I do? I withdrew the petition, she left my office, and 3 weeks later she was gone. We sat in silence for a moment. The wind rustled through the trees. A child laughed somewhere in the distance. "There's something else," Vega said quietly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, the edges frayed. "She gave this to me the day she withdrew the petition. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should give it to someone who could help. I've been carrying it for 10 years, Your Honor, waiting for the right person." He handed it to me. "I think you're that person." I took the envelope. My name wasn't on it, just 2 words, written in shaky handwriting. The truth. Vega stood up. "Be careful, Your Honor. Richard Holden is not a man who forgives, and he's not a man who loses." He walked away, leaving me alone on that bench with the envelope in my hands. I didn't open it right away. I waited until I was back in my chambers, door locked, blinds drawn. Then I carefully broke the seal and pulled out the pages inside. It was a letter, handwritten, 4 pages. The handwriting was uneven, rushed, desperate. To whoever reads this, my name is Evelyn Holden. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it means my husband Richard had something to do with it. I don't know how to explain what I've lived through. The control, the manipulation, the fear. Richard is not the man people think he is. He's calculated, he's ruthless, and he will do anything to protect his empire. I've seen things I can't unsee. 2 years ago, I overheard a conversation between Richard and a city official. They were discussing a contractor who'd threatened to go public about bribes and payoffs on a downtown construction project. Richard said the problem would be handled. A week later, that contractor disappeared. His family never found him. I wanted to go to the police, but Richard told me no one would believe me. He said he owned half the department. He said if I ever tried to leave, he'd make sure I never saw Caroline again. He said he'd bury me so deep no one would ever find me. I tried to file for divorce, but he found out, and he made it very clear what would happen if I went through with it. I don't have much time. I can feel it. He's watching me. He knows I know. Too much. I have proof, financial records, recordings, evidence of everything he's done. I've hidden it somewhere safe, somewhere he'll never think to look. If something happens to me, someone needs to find it. Someone needs to stop him. And please, please, don't let Caroline become like him. She's just a child. She's been conditioned. She's been twisted into believing that this is normal, that power is everything, that people are disposable. She called me weak once. She laughed when I cried. She's not cruel. She's just lost. and I don't know how to save her anymore. The letter ended with one line: "He'll never let me go, and he'll never let her be free." I sat there for an hour, staring at those words. Evelyn Halden had known she was going to die. She'd written it down, she'd hidden proof, and then she'd vanished. And her daughter, 13 years old at the time, had watched it all happen. Maybe she'd even helped. I thought about the girl who'd laughed in my courtroom, the girl who'd smiled when asked about her mother, the girl who'd looked me in the eye and said, "No one knows where she is." Because she did know. She'd always known. The moment I decided to act on Evelyn's letter, everything changed. I wasn't just investigating a missing officer anymore. I was reopening a cold case that powerful people had worked very hard to bury, and they knew it. I announced my decision at a scheduled court session the following Monday. I stated on the record that I was formally requesting a full investigation into the disappearance of Evelyn Halden, citing new evidence that suggested foul play. I requested cooperation from the district attorney's office, the police department, and the county forensics team. The courtroom went silent. Reporters scribbled furiously. Richard Halden's legal team, 3 of them seated in the back, stood up and walked out without a word. By Tuesday morning, my office was flooded with calls. Some were supportive: journalists, retired cops, people who'd always suspected something was wrong with the Halden family. But most were not. I received letters from law firms I'd never heard of, all demanding that I recuse myself from the case. They cited bias, conflict of interest, overreach. One letter, printed on expensive letterhead, suggested that my personal vendetta against a prominent citizen was damaging the integrity of the court. The mayor's office called. A polite assistant expressed the mayor's concern about my decision. She suggested that pursuing a decade-old case with limited evidence might not be the best use of judicial resources. She said the mayor hoped I would reconsider. I didn't. On Wednesday, Richard Halden's legal team filed a formal motion to have me removed from the case entirely. They argued that I had demonstrated clear bias and that my involvement compromised their client's right to a fair proceeding. The motion was 47 pages long, meticulously crafted, and designed to bury me in procedure. I denied it. Thursday afternoon, I got a visit from a man I'd known for 20 years, Judge Lawrence Tate, senior judge in the district, a mentor, a friend. He came to my chambers, closed the door, and sat down heavily. "What are you doing?" he asked, not unkindly. "My job. Your job is to preside over cases, not launch personal crusades." I looked at him. "Larry, a woman is dead. I know it. You know it. Everyone in this town knows it, and no one has done a damn thing about it." "Because there's no proof," he said. "You have a letter written by a woman who was, by all accounts, emotionally unstable at the time. That's not enough. It's enough to investigate. And what happens when you investigate and find nothing? What happens when you drag this family through the mud and come up empty? You'll destroy your career. You'll destroy your reputation. And for what? For the truth." He shook his head. "The truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it just gets you buried." He left without another word. That night I worked late. My wife had stopped asking when I'd be home. She knew I was in too deep to walk away now. I was reviewing case files, cross-referencing dates, trying to piece together a timeline of Evelyn's last days, when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my chambers. Slow, deliberate, echoing. I looked up. The courthouse was supposed to be empty at this hour. Security locked the doors at 7. It was past 9. The footsteps stopped. Outside my door. I stood up, walked over, and opened it. Caroline Halden stood in the hallway, alone. No lawyers, no father. Just her, wearing jeans and a dark coat, her face pale in the dim fluorescent light. "Your Honor," she said softly, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." My heart was pounding. "How did you get in here?" She smiled faintly. Side door, security's getting lazy. I should have called someone. Should have had her escorted out. But I didn't. I wanted to hear what she had to say. What do you want, Caroline? She stepped closer, just inside the doorway. The hallway stretched. Out behind her, empty, dark, silent. You think you're saving me, don't you? She said. I didn't answer. She tilted her head slightly, studying me. You think if you dig deep enough, if you find enough evidence, you'll uncover some big truth. That you'll expose my father, that you'll get justice for my mother. That maybe you'll even save me from whatever you think I've become. Her voice was calm, too calm. You're not saving me, Your Honor. I held her gaze. Then what am I doing? She smiled. But it wasn't the same smile. Not the one from the deposition. That one had laughter in it. This one had teeth. You're digging your own grave. The words hung in the air between us. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there watching me with those empty eyes. My father is a powerful man, she continued. More powerful than you realize. He spent 30 years building an empire, not just in real estate, but in influence, in control, in fear. And you? You're one judge in one small courthouse in one forgettable town. You think you can take him down with a letter and a photograph? I think the truth matters, I said. She laughed, soft, bitter. The truth. You sound like my mother. She believed in the truth, too. She thought if she gathered enough evidence, if she wrote it all down, someone would listen. Someone would care. What happened to her, Caroline? Her smile faded. For just a moment, one fleeting moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not guilt, not sadness. Just exhaustion. She made a choice, Caroline said quietly, and she lived with the consequences. Did you help him? She didn't answer. She just looked at me, and in that silence I understood. She had, not directly, not violently, but she'd stood by. She'd watched. She'd kept quiet. And maybe, she'd even helped him clean up afterward. You should stop, Your Honor, she said, turning toward the door, before you end up like her. She walked away, her footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. I stood there, frozen, listening as the sound faded into silence. And then I closed the door, locked it, and sat down at my desk. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't stopping, not now, not ever, because Caroline had just confirmed what I'd suspected all along. Evelyn Halden was dead. Richard had killed her, and Caroline knew. And if I could prove it, if I could find the evidence Evelyn had hidden, I could bring them both down. 2 days before the final hearing, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Caroline standing in my doorway, her voice cold and detached, her warning sharp as a knife. But I also thought about Evelyn's letter, about Officer Diaz, about every person who'd been silenced because Richard Halden had the power to erase them. I wasn't going to let him erase me. The courtroom was packed. I'd never seen it so full. Every seat was taken. Reporters, lawyers, law students, curious onlookers, people who'd followed the case from the beginning and wanted to see how it would end. The air was thick with tension, anticipation, the kind of electric silence that comes right before a storm breaks. Richard Halden sat in the front row, flanked by his legal team. 4 attorneys this time, all in sharp suits, all watching me with the kind of cold precision that comes from, years of winning. Richard himself looked calm. Too calm. His hands were folded in his lap, his expression neutral, almost bored. Like this was just another inconvenience. Another obstacle to be cleared. Caroline sat beside him. She wore a pale blue dress, her hair pulled back, her face composed. She didn't look at me, didn't look at anyone. Just stared straight ahead like she was watching something no one else could see. Daniel Grant, the prosecutor, sat at his table, reviewing notes. He looked tired, worn down. This case had aged him. I wondered if he'd wanted it at all, or if, like so many others, he'd been told to handle it carefully, to not push too hard. I took my seat at the bench. The bailiff called the court to order. The room fell silent. This hearing, I began, was called to address new evidence related to the disappearance of Evelyn Halden and the ongoing investigation into the disappearance of Officer Miguel Diaz. Both cases have raised significant questions about obstruction, corruption, and the integrity of our justice system. I paused, letting the words settle. I know many of you have strong opinions about this case, about this family, about what should or shouldn't be investigated. But I want to be clear. My only obligation is to the truth, not to reputation, not to power, not to convenience, to the truth. One of Richard's attorneys stood. Your Honor, with all due respect, this hearing is based on speculation and hearsay. There is no credible evidence linking my client to any crime. We move for immediate dismissal. Your motion is noted and denied, I said. Sit down. He sat. I turned to Grant. Counselor, do you have any new evidence to present? Grant stood slowly. He looked at me, then at Richard, then back at me. Your Honor, the District Attorney's Office has conducted a thorough review of all available evidence. At this time, we do not have sufficient grounds to— The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Everyone turned. A man walked in. Mid-50s, gray suit, plain briefcase, unremarkable in every way except for the look on his face, grim, determined, like a man who'd made a decision he couldn't take back. He walked down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing in the silence, and stopped at the prosecutor's table. Your Honor, he said, his voice steady. My name is Jonathan Reeves. I worked for Richard Halden for 12 years as his senior accountant and financial advisor, and I have something you need to hear. The courtroom erupted. Reporters stood, cameras flashed. Richard's attorneys jumped to their feet, shouting objections. Richard himself didn't move. He just stared at Reeves with the kind of cold, focused rage I'd only seen a few times in my life. I banged the gavel. Order in this court. The room quieted. I looked at Reeves. Mr. Reeves, this is highly irregular. If you have evidence, you should have presented it to the district attorney's office beforehand. I tried, Your Honor, Reeves said. 3 times. Each time I was told the case was closed, that there was no active investigation, that my testimony wasn't needed. He glanced at Grant, who looked away. So I came here. Directly to you. One of Richard's attorneys stepped forward. Your Honor, this is a clear violation of procedure. We demand that this witness be excluded. Overruled, I said. Mr. Reeves, approach the bench. He did. He set his briefcase on the edge of the bench and opened it. Inside was a USB drive. Your Honor, he said quietly, this drive contains 12 years of financial records. Emails, recorded phone conversations, and internal documents detailing Richard Halden's network of bribes, payoffs, and blackmail. It includes communications with city officials, police officers, judges, and contractors. And it includes evidence of what happened to Evelyn Halden. My heart was, pounding. Where did you get this? I compiled it, he said. Over the years, as insurance. I knew that one day Richard would turn on me, or someone would come asking questions. I kept copies of everything. And when Officer Diaz disappeared, I knew it was time to come forward. Why now? Because I'm dying, Your Honor. His voice cracked slightly. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I have maybe 3 months, and I don't want to die knowing I stayed silent. I took the drive, looked at it, then looked at Richard. For the first time since the hearing started, his expression changed. Not fear, not panic, just calculation. Like he was already 10 steps ahead, already planning his next move. Mr. Reeves, I said, I'm going to recess this hearing while I review this evidence. Bailiff, please take Mr. Reeves into protective custody. I want him under guard at all times. Your Honor, one of Richard's attorneys started. Court is in recess, I said, and banged the gavel. I spent the next 6 hours in my chambers, door locked, reviewing the contents of that USB drive. And what I found was worse than I'd imagined. Richard Halden had been running a criminal enterprise for over 15 years. He'd bribed inspectors to overlook safety violations. He'd paid off city planners to approve projects that should never have been built. He'd funneled money to political campaigns in exchange for favorable zoning laws. And when people got in his way, when they asked too many questions, when they threatened to go public, he made them disappear. There were recordings, hours of them. Richard's voice calm and measured, discussing problems that needed to be handled. Conversations with police officers about suppressing investigations. Conversations with city officials about redirecting attention. Conversations with contractors about making sure certain people understood the consequences of disloyalty. And then I found it. The recording that broke the case wide open. It was dated 8 months ago. A phone conversation between Richard and Caroline. I plugged in my headphones and listened. Richard: "The cop's getting too close. He's been asking about your mother." Caroline: "So what do you want me to do?" Richard: "Nothing. I'll handle it. But if anyone asks, you don't know anything. Understand?" Caroline: "I understand." A pause. Then Caroline laughed. That same nervous, chilling laugh I'd heard in the deposition. Caroline: "Dad, you worry too much. No one's going to find her." Richard: "They better not." Caroline: "She begged him not to do it. Pathetic, really. But he wouldn't let her leave. Neither would I." Silence. Richard: "Stop talking." Caroline: "Why? You're the one who taught me. You said people who get in the way need to disappear. You said it's just business." Richard: "I said stop." The recording ended. I sat there, headphones still on, staring at the screen. Caroline had just confessed. On tape. Not directly, but enough. Enough to implicate her. Enough to prove she knew what happened to her mother. Enough to prove she'd been complicit. I pulled off the headphones and leaned back in my chair. The room was spinning. Evelyn Halden was dead. Richard had killed her, and Caroline, his own daughter, had helped him cover it up. And now, finally, I had proof. I reconvened the hearing the next morning. The courtroom was even more packed than before. Word had spread. Everyone knew something big was coming. I looked out at the crowd, at the reporters, at Richard and Caroline, sitting side by side, their faces unreadable. Then I looked at Jonathan Reeves, seated in the witness stand under guard. "Mr. Reeves," I said, "I've reviewed the evidence you provided, and I'm issuing a warrant for the arrest of Richard Halden on charges of bribery, obstruction of justice, and suspicion of murder in the death of Evelyn Halden." The courtroom exploded. Richard stood slowly. His attorneys surrounded him, shouting objections, demanding appeals, filing motions, but it was too late. The bailiff moved forward, handcuffs ready. Richard looked at me, not with anger, not with fear, just cold acknowledgement, like he'd always known this day would come, like he'd been prepared for it. Then he turned and looked at his daughter. Caroline hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. And for the first time since I'd met her, the smile was gone. Maybe she remembered the laugh. Maybe she finally understood what she'd done. Or maybe, just maybe, she realized it was too late to take any of it back. The recordings were damning, not just for Richard, but for everyone who'd helped him. Within 48 hours, 3 city officials resigned. 2 police officers were placed on administrative leave. The district attorney's office launched an internal investigation, and the FBI opened a formal inquiry into corruption in our county. But what broke the case wide open wasn't Richard's crimes. It was Caroline's voice. On one of the recordings Jonathan Reeves had provided, she'd laughed, that same nervous, chilling laugh, and said she begged him not to do it. Pathetic, really. But he wouldn't let her leave. Neither would I. That confession set everything in motion. 3 days later, based on information extracted from Richard's financial records, a forensics team excavated a property he'd sold 8 years ago, a vacant lot on the eastern edge of town, slated for development that never happened. They found her, Evelyn Halden's remains were buried 6 feet deep, wrapped in canvas, hidden beneath a concrete foundation that had been poured and abandoned. The medical examiner confirmed her identity. Through dental records, cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head. She'd been dead for 10 years. Just like I'd suspected. Just like everyone had known, but no one had proven. Richard Halden was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He denied everything. His attorneys fought hard, filed motion after motion, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the financial trail, the body. It was airtight. 2 weeks before the trial, Richard fled the country. Private jet, false passport, gone. Interpol issued a warrant. The FBI launched a manhunt. But as of today, he's never been found. Some say he's in South America. Others say Europe. Maybe he's dead. Maybe he's living under a new name in a new country, starting over. I don't know. And honestly, I stopped caring. Because the real story, the one that still haunts me, is what happened to Caroline. She was charged as an accessory after the fact. Obstruction of justice. Conspiracy to conceal a homicide. The recordings prove she'd known about her mother's death, that she'd helped her father cover it up, that she'd smiled and laughed and lied for 10 years while Evelyn Halden's body rotted in the ground. Her trial was quiet. No media circus, no packed courtroom. Just a few reporters, a handful of spectators, and me, presiding over the final chapter of a case that had consumed my life for months. Caroline pled guilty. No fight, no defense. She sat in the defendant's chair, hands folded, face blank, and said 2 words, "I'm guilty." Her attorney tried to argue diminished capacity, childhood trauma, coercion. He painted a picture of a girl who'd been manipulated and controlled by a monster. And maybe some of that was true. Maybe Richard had twisted her. Maybe he'd broken something inside her that could never be fixed. But I kept thinking about that laugh, about the moment she'd mocked her own mother, about the coldness in her eyes when she'd stood in my chambers and told me I was digging my own grave. She wasn't just a victim. She was complicit, and she knew it. I sentenced her to 20 years. She'll be eligible for parole in 12. She didn't react, didn't cry, didn't smile. Just stood up, let the bailiff cuff her, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Officer Miguel Diaz was never found. The investigation suggested he'd been paid off, relocated, given a new identity, told to disappear. Some of Richard's financial records hinted at large cash withdrawals around the time of his disappearance. But there was no proof, no body, no confession. His wife still lives in town. I see her sometimes at the grocery store. She doesn't ask questions anymore. I think she's made peace with not knowing. Jonathan Reeves died 6 weeks after the trial. Pancreatic cancer, just like he'd said. He spent his last days in hospice, knowing he'd done the right thing. I visited him once. He looked small, frail, but his eyes were clear. "Did I do enough?" he asked me. "You did more than enough," I told him. He nodded, and then he closed his eyes. Justice didn't roar that day. It whispered, barely loud enough to hear. Richard Halden escaped. Caroline Halden will eventually walk free. Officer Diaz is still missing, and Evelyn Halden is still dead. But the truth came out. And sometimes that's the only victory you get. I still think about Caroline, about the girl who laughed at her mother in my courtroom, about the moment, just one fleeting moment, when the smile disappeared and I saw something human underneath. Regret, maybe, or just exhaustion. I'll never know. But I heard it. That laugh, not cruel, just empty. And I'll never forget the girl who laughed at her mother, and the second later when her entire life collapsed.